Okay, we're now ready for our last panel, but first I'd like to remind you all to fill out the evaluation form that was in your panel descriptions for today and turn that in as you're leaving the auditorium, please. So without further ado, I would like to present our next panel, a roundtable, Collective Now, Artists on the Collective Present. And the panel chair is Delita Maria Benfeld.
This one is.
Oh, is it? Okay. Hi, everyone. We are so getting down to the hardcore right now, right? And it's perfect that we just had a performance, and I feel like our space was really opened up. This is a round table that will truly be a round table, a discussion amongst this group of amazing artists. And you can scan the QR code to kind of see what the original questions were that I posed to this group of artists. It was essentially organized on the proposition that collective practices constitute important sites of knowledge production, drawing on diverse genealogies and producing new trajectories of thought. What they propose then is that there can be other fields of meaning through which we can understand not just this art, but all art. And I can think really of no better group of people than to be in conversation with than these folks. I want to underline, I think, some of the themes that have emerged throughout the day, and speaking as a decolonial and post-colonial and transnational feminist artist and researcher, the idea of constructing spaces of knowledge production that are irrespective of the boundaries of official canons of knowledge, certainly undergirds the context of this conversation. And I think, Robert, you were going to say a couple of words about how we got to this point that we're at now of having the conversation and some of the preparatory work that we did.
I simply wanted to... Actually, you know what? I'm just going to project. I'm quite capable of doing that.
The recording may need it.
Everything has to be recorded these days, doesn't it? Some things are just real time. Just, you just let them go. They allow things to have an expiration date. I just want to acknowledge the work that Delita has done in building this conversation over time. And just to let folks know that those of us who are gathered here today, sort of come into this point of our conversation having already spent some time together. This has, as you will see, included the construction of a montage of extracts from various works that we have done. So that's bringing us into some kind of conversation already. And we've also exchanged over the past few weeks and months a series of emails. We've had a Skype call in which we've built this conversation as well. So there is a foundation of a kind of collectivity that is already in place for us to be here together today.
And we decided rather than do lengthy introductions, which I have to say honestly, to introduce each one of these people whose practice is so complex and long, that it would probably take half of our session. So instead, I'm just going to say their names. We have Beatriz Santiago Munoz. We have Robert Sember, Kim Hu, Sasha Sumner, and Salome Chasnoff. And our itinerary then is going to actually begin with sharing some work. So we're also going to mix it up a bit by sharing with you an audiovisual reel of excerpts, as Robert just mentioned, of each of these artist practices. These excerpts are not at all meant to capture the totality of their work, but rather just to give a little bit of texture, to put some images on the table, some sounds. Let me also note that we have two members of the panel who were not able to be with us, Celia Herrera Rodriguez in Oakland and Davida Ingram in Seattle. Their work is included on the reel, and I have a couple of words from them that will enrich our discussion. So we'll run some of the audiovisual stuff, and then we'll have a discussion. We'll run a little bit more, go back to discussion, and then have a little bit of closing audiovisual stuff, and then discuss a little bit more, and then also open it up to you. I also want to note that if people would like to pose questions to us throughout, you could use the hashtag Collective Now, and I'll be trying to keep track of that as we go to insert those questions and to kind of, let's see if we can fire up the Twitter feed a little bit. As Larissa mentioned earlier, it doesn't seem to be very live yet, but let's see if we can change that up. So with that said, we'll run the first bit of the video, Andrew, and then I will let Andrew know when to pause it. And I'll also be reading a little bit from Celia's work as it runs. But let's begin the video. And I think we're going to move to watch it too. Lights down? Can we have lights down for the video, please? If possible. Yeah, if you could start over, please. Thank you. Yeah, could you go to the very beginning, the very top of the tape, please? Thanks.
Time is by far the most artificial of all our inventions, and in being bound to the planet turning on its own axis, is no less arbitrary than would be, say, a calculation based on the growth of trees, readily visible, at least, in patterns of concentric rings formed in many types to the exact calendar year, and even revealing the events that have occurred in the environment, or the duration required for a piece of limestone to disintegrate, flake by flake, grain by grain. And this is quite apart from the fact that the solar day, which we take as our guideline, does not provide any precise measurement, so that in order to reckon time, we have to devise an imaginary average sun, which has an invariable speed of movement and does not incline toward the equator.
You can try to keep me down, you can try to keep me under, but you'll never get my will, you'll never take my will to fight. Cause I was born at the bottom of this mountain I'm scaling, and I'll probably climb it till the day I die.
Most of the ads still show very small women, and it's not a lot of diversity.
Tell me in your own words, what does it mean to be disabled?
They're not in our shoes, and so they see us different. They don't see us as we see ourselves.
We're somebody, and we have a voice and the rights to be who we are.
And here I'm going to share a few words from Celia. Las Jornadas de la Semilla Caminante, 2009 to 2010. The basis of this work, from installation, performance to theater, is a progression of radical Chicana feminism that follows along the path carved out by Sheri Moraga, Gloria Ansaldúa, and Yolanda Lopez. And that, by the way, is Sheri Moraga in the front row. The taking back and reinterpretation of the primordial figures of Coatlicue, Coyo Xuaqui, La Llorona, to expose what has been hidden and bound within the enaguas of La Virgen Guadalupe. In my work, the radical positioning is in the taking of the position of spiritual leadership normally occupied by men, referred to as roadmen, who in present day, and you can pause it, Andrew, thanks. Thank you. And we can have the lights come up now and end the video so we can discuss further. But to finish Celia's contribution, in my work, the radical positioning is in the taking of the position of spiritual leadership normally occupied by men, referred to as roadmen, who in present day travel between rural and urban Native communities in the US to hold prayer ceremonies. And can we have the name taken, can we just have the video turned off for the moment? Can we just have a blank screen? Thank you.
So before we begin having our conversation, I just want to issue a corrective. The first film that was shown in my reel, actually half the audio was missing, and I think it's a crucial piece of the audio because it was the other voice in the collaborative process. This was a film that was part of a multimedia installation. It was projected in multiple places into this kind of fabric womb, and I sat across from my collaborator, and we were weaving on a tabletop loom, and then people took pieces from the fabric and gave it to us, and we weaved it into what we were making, and our two voices wove the sound, and her voice was missing.
I think taking up that thread, in one of the conversations that we had in preparing for this moment, one of the members of the May Collective, Jessica Bresmond, who worked with Kim Hu, shared that collective practice for her is about diluting her own identity and practice as an artist and making herself plural. And so I would like to put to all of you then, how do you think about this in your practice? How is this evidenced in the process and the form of the work?
I can go. Okay. Yeah, so, wait, is it working? Okay, let me take this one. Yeah. So I was working with Jessica, and actually, yeah, we talked a lot about this question. And what we were saying is that we sort of bring to a group a sort of like different spices, as if it was like different spices in a saucepan. And then we come up with a sort of new creativity and a new style and some new art, but that we did together with our own little spices. So that's pretty much for us like the beauty of collaborating as well. And yeah.
I could respond too. So yeah, I wrote something down because I was thinking about how to express a really complex idea. Because for me, collective practice, it's it's this tension between collaboration and diversity, or I don't know. We'll leave it at that. But and when I heard Jessica's talking about the dilution of identity, I was thinking, for me, it's like this purposeful projection of self into the other as I actively and intentionally attempt to absorb each other and co-create a bridge of fantasy connection. So it's kind of like we're trying to merge and it's impossible.
Sorry, I kind of disagree with that actually, because I think it's all about making compromises.
Yeah.
And it's really, because we're all, like, especially with my collective, it's a really international collective. We all have different ages, different background. We are all working in creative field, but yeah, for example, I work as a design student usually, and then like Jessica is like an artist, and Jorge is like a sound designer, and we find compromises to understand each other. And I think it's not like we don't have a boundary or something, but it's more about it takes time to basically work together, of course, and it takes time to understand each other. But yeah, for me, like it's really like it's actually quite easy like to work in group if there's a good aura in the group as well.
I would agree.
Okay, I guess I'm going to jump off on the idea of boundaries and location and place. My name is Sasha. I'm the person in the Hungry March Band that was the first video, the music video. And so I've been thinking about how does that group or collective, the politics of the space, and how the location actually was the first thing that started, that kind of inspired this music to begin, and how important the geography is. It started off in a place which actually the Brooklyn waterfront, which at that time, 15 years ago, was kind of an abandoned space, which was a space of free imagination. And anything could happen there. If you're in a place where there's no rules, where there's no restrictions, you can you can squat there, you can play really loud music there, you can do anything you want there. That kind of allows a freedom of flow of community and collectivity. And that's how that band kind of came together. And there's something about that, the freedom that a geographical place gives people and community, which is important, I think. There's actually a book that was written about that space called Accidental Playgrounds by Daniel Campo, which talks about how culture develops in spaces of freedom and the cultural exchange that happens there. Of course, the honeymoon is over after the mid-2000s, when it started to become really developed and real estate and economic development, everything exploded there. So the band kind of dispersed, only physically. The band is still together, and actually it's actually kind of great because we still travel as a group and have crossed borders and have made connections on a street level with people in many other countries in Europe and South America. And so our home is a global home. So it's great that it started with something that was a real place, a real actual physical place.
Okay. Yeah, we're trying to have a round table, and so just imagine this is like a big round table, and we're all around it together.
I guess I'm trying to jump off of what you were saying and thinking about the kind of collective work that I have done has usually come out of starting from other places, not from my artistic practice, which is I started thinking, or maybe we can all start thinking now, about all kinds of places in which there are many people together as collectives. So anytime you are producing a film with 5 crew members, it is a collective, and you are with other people who you are filming, and it is a collective, and all of us here together are also a collective, except that instead of, or a class that you might teach is also a collective, but it has very defined roles, and everybody is accustomed to working within those defined roles. Those defined roles, as you come into the classroom or you come into the space of the conference, you walk into that role. If you then take that idea that every space that you inhabit is a collective, but when you propose collective artwork or collective artistic practice, perhaps those roles are not so fixed. And it is a place to experiment, to have some freedom, to revisit those roles, and maybe to recreate a pedagogical space in which those roles are not so fixed, in which you can question them, in which you can stand up from the table and move outside into other places, or maybe also if we start questioning the space of a conference as a collective space, we can arrive at other forms as well. So most of the collective projects that I have done have actually been like, how can I reimagine a pedagogical space outside of these roles? Let's think of it simply as a collective, start from zero again. And other forms as well. This didn't necessarily start as artistic practice. And maybe I don't even consider some of them artistic practice either.
Yeah, I think I just want to respond to that too, because I'm teaching a class. It's in art education, undergraduates and graduates, and it's called Doing Democracy. And I didn't entitle the class, I inherited it. And I felt at first a lot of resistance around that word democracy. It stimulated my cynicism, my disappointment. But I decided to approach it as this active, co-creative space and see to what extent, given the disproportionate power relationships inherent in the graduate school and undergraduate school system, how can we make it a collective co-creative space. And so together we started developing all kinds of activities and practices that continually challenge the process. And we create the syllabus and we create the content together. And it's been a pretty wonderful experience because I've begun thinking of it as my art practice now.
Okay, and I think with that, we want to go ahead and now roll part 2 of our reel. Thank you. I'll read this part. For years, the International Sound Art Collective, Ultra Red, have conducted sound investigations alongside diverse political movements in North America and Europe. In October 2014, the 12 members gathered in Cologne, Germany.
Ultra Red is a group of cultural producers, organizers, researchers, based in a number of cities: Los Angeles, New York, Berlin, London, and the rural southwest of England. We develop sound investigations in relationship to specific political struggles that we ourselves have been involved in for many years, and in some cases for decades. We develop these sound investigations that contribute to that local political work, and then put those contexts into conversation and invite other people to be co-researchers with us in those struggles.
Recording number 1.
A listening session is a session in which people come together and they listen. First, they don't speak, they don't touch, they don't see, they turn their other senses off and just listen to the sounds that are being played before them. Then they're asked to reflect on what they heard. And just to put out there the first thing that comes to them, what did you hear?
What did you hear? Spaß.
Jazz and dissonance. Straßenfest.
Protest.
Shouty politics.
We tend to think of political struggle as the articulating of a demand, of expressing a grievance. But what we've learned is that politics organizes itself at the base in specific communities through how we hear each other. And so once again, we're in a sound investigation. So the literacies of listening are always with us.
Nacen de un huevo. No llevan arco y flecha, ni canasta. Ocupan un espacio entre medio. No glorifican la maternidad ni la guerra. Caen como la fruta de un árbol.
you can pause it there. Thanks. We're trading positions.
I've got a new identity.
Salome, you opened the question of pedagogy, and I wonder if anyone wants to jump in on that. Robert or Bea or anyone else?
I'm still a little sort of back in the first question from the first section, and also hearing the resonances with the panel prior to the performance, which positioned itself very much as a sort of corrective or an interrogation into the more romantic, the sort of misty notions of collectivity, and wanting to raise the issue of the unevennesses that may exist within collectives. And what I would like to one of the things I'd like to sort of put on the table is what it means to come together, not necessarily around a kind of shared practice, but around a necessity. So one of the comments that we heard, the very last comment that we heard in the panel prior to the performance, that question that referenced the issue of the HIV and AIDS struggle, that this was a necessity that produced a collectivity. And when you actually have the kind of formation of a collective around what I would call that kind of urgency or that necessity, it raises a series of sort of questions about the form and the practice that's going to follow. So that the question of collectivity, I think, is most useful when we begin to put it in dialogue with certain very specific necessities or demands or questions or concerns. In the case of ultra-red, this collectivity that has now existed for 20 years arose out of the specific conditions of the HIV and AIDS crisis in Los Angeles, and an affinity group within ACT UP that went on to establish the first needle exchange program in that city, a needle exchange program that exists to this day. And the formation of the aesthetic questions or issues arises out of that very pragmatic concern. When you're doing something that is against the law, it's a human rights issue, and it is in its sense also an aesthetic issue that exceeds the domains of art. And I would say sort of aesthetic in that sense of having to do with the embodied experience, having to do with questions of life, questions of the human. I mean, there are many directions in which we can take this. So that it's not as though artists come into doing a public health work, but there is an understanding that there is in fact a sort of a foundation of solidarity, that there is a common issue of concern and investment that carries through those practices. The very specific issue, the concern had to do with policing. How do you do something in the name of justice that the state considers illegal, which is what needle exchange was considered, and depending on what state you're in this country will remain so. And how do you address the constant police harassment around that? One of the things was documentation was necessary because people were being arrested, going into courts of law. You want to make documentation, but you also want to protect the anonymity of folks. Sound became a way of recording, as opposed to video, that enabled you to have a juridical record that also to some extent protected the anonymity of the folks that you were working with. And out of that, the form of listening arises as a situated, not an abstract form, but a situated practice in relation to a demand. And the collectivity arises out of that as well. To just quickly step into the question of the pedagogy, then the question of pedagogy for me, in relation to collectivity, becomes, in a certain sense, that rigorous practice of, mean, it's basically sort of, having a historical consciousness. The realization that if you are situated in relation to demand, to crisis, to struggle, that you are therefore in a relationship of history. And that means that one of the things that a collective needs to deal with mindfully is how do we constantly renew ourselves? How do we maintain a position of investigation, a position of learning? What then is going to be our pedagogy? It's not then only what is our art practice, how do we make things together, but actually how do we function as a group that is in a practice of investigation and of learning. And that's, there's much I could say about that, but it's a very sort of strategic and critical thing. And this is the last thing I'll say about this is where collectivity, in its unevennesses, in its pluralities, in its solidarities, but also in its trust, in its love, in its affections, and in its duration, the ongoing process of sustaining relationships, I think, creates a kind of pedagogical condition that is absolutely critical. And this is one of the reasons why I think collectivity is something to take seriously, and something that it's worth spending time on.
Does anyone else want to address the question of necessity?
I think I could talk a bit about a project that I've organized twice, walking seminar through for 3 weeks that I've organized for 2 summers in a row. I live in San Juan in Puerto Rico, and I'll just very quickly say that it was as a group of artists and others that I've been working with, it became very clear to us that we had to develop different ways of working, thinking, teaching, and that we had to change the form as well as the content of what we were doing. And one of the first ways that we began to attempt to change that form was to do very simple things like not be in a classroom, like not have the same kind of structure between a participant, a student, and a teacher. And so that's how this walking seminar that takes us 3 weeks, in which we sleep outdoors and sort of co-organize our lives for a long duration of time. It is the project comes out of a necessity of creating different kinds of pedagogies, and we need to. There is another very practical necessity, which is that you can't do that. You can't think in a space like the ones that we were going through unless you do it as a group. We need to be together in order to do it. You can't live on a beach for 3 days in the place where there are immigrants coming in boats, police, narcotráfico. You can't do it alone. So the possibility of being together in a group doing it allows us to put our bodies in a place where it matters in order to actually see things that cannot be seen otherwise. That also involved doing something that was outside of the law, and so we protect each other by being together. I remember the first day that we all got together for this past seminar, and I said, sleeping outdoors is not allowed, is illegal. So every place that we are going to be staying in, we are going to be, it's going to be illegal. You're about to do something for 3 weeks that we're not allowed to do. Is everybody clear on what that means? And everybody was, the idea that all of us were there together, willing to put ourselves at risk in order simply to think differently, also changed the conditions of love among the group, I think. I think that that's also something to think about, what collectivity or collective work can produce is also not just a different kind of work, but a different kind of love.
that's very general and utopian, but
it's good for Valentine's Day.
right on topic.
Yeah, earlier today we were talking about how to teach collectivity, and well, I think the problem of our educational system right now, like especially in the art and design school, is the fact that it's really there's a lot of hierarchy. Hierarchy, is that how you say? Yeah, and well, that sounds very communist what I'm saying right now, but maybe because by having this experience with Make Collective, we're all treated on the same level, and that's how it worked. And I think maybe like school should be more considered as a laboratory where teachers and students would sort of have the same role and learn together, like to create new stuff, and like retreat school as a sort of platform of knowledge and of creating new knowledges as well. So, yeah.
That's fantastic. And on that note, we're going to now screen the final segment of video that includes work by Davida Ingram and May Collective. So, and actually, I'm going to share a few words from Davida a little bit into it.
This is a palace.
And I've always said, I don't like to go to circus, I don't like to go to none of that shit, because I go, where's the elephant gun? Elephants are just like people. People flip out. What if an elephant flips out, they're going to kill her? I've always said that, and the shit came to pass. And only the white man can look at some shit and like an elephant and look at it and just go. Theme park.
So these are some words from Davida. Good evening. I apologize for not being able to join you as I imagined, and thank you for organizing the conversation and to everyone for being here. I want to share a story. A friend of mine who is a sister who rocks a short natural that is threaded with silver hair and makes incredibly beautiful prints and poems came to me fretting because a young person had recently asked her what was her preferred gender pronouns. I thought to myself, here we go. This is a Sojourner's Ain't I a Woman moment bisected by gender liberation, maybe. A soft smile came to my lips as I tried to assure my friend that this vexing question for her was actually an act of kindness, meant to prevent the wounds that gender binaries make, and to extend its intention to its final degree to interrupt death. I use the word fluencies because I am fluent to a degree in blackness and queerness and femness and being a trans ally, though at that last I am always working on. My friend, who might stutter through the idea of calling herself a cisgendered black woman, does know the indignities that being black and female brings in a racist and sexist country. And I'll end there, and this is... So there was a, actually, let me do this. There were a couple of more questions from Davida that I'd like to read. How can we create collectives that teach us to question how societal roles play out as centrifugal forces in our collective consciousness, our movement work, our real lives? What insights and practices can encourage us to step outside of ourselves and do perspective taking about where different marginalized people are coming from, while also cultivating intact understandings of who we feel we truly are in our own humanity? How can we create fluencies around historical and future identities that really get us to free? So if anyone wants to respond to those, or to, now we've seen, you know, excerpts from everyone's pieces, if you want to respond to what you've seen or ask questions about. Process. There were some images of the May Collective's process at the end, which was very cool.
Sure. Yeah, and well, that's kind of the idea of working in a collective as well, is that the result will never be the one that you think it's going to be at the end. I think that's the difference between collaborating and being in a collective. Is really in a collective, you all always have to brainstorm about different ideas, and like your ideas can change a lot. So during the time we were like working on the Water Ritual, we changed our mind like so many times, and also we all consider ourselves as artists, but we're sort of like self-taught artists as well. So, for example, I'm not like a pro at textile, and like you sort of work on it and you learn some new skill, but it's a whole sort of self-teaching way, and you learn from others, you help others as well. Of course, we all had our own little tasks, but at the end of the day, we were also helping, for example, for the set, or we were all part of the performance as well. So we were sort of multitasking a lot. Yeah.
Okay, I think we want to open it up to questions from the audience at this point. Yes. I'm sorry? This mic? Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Great.
Hi, I was wondering, this is kind of in relation to pedagogy, in relation to collectivity, and how possibly we can consider community conscientization, which is coming from a Freirean pedagogical view, in defining a more mindfulness approach to collectivity. I don't know if you had any kind of ideas of how that's possible in a counter-hegemonic way.
I mean, I can make an initial sort of cut or demarcation, and then maybe others want to come into this. So let me make this is a very reductive demarcation. But there is one where I would sort of, and this connects a little bit with me, with the comments that we were hearing from Saidet Harry in that opening round of the question of what does it mean to, how are we defining art? And that very compelling image that she gives, that for me, art is the capacity to survive in order to be able to produce new bodies, or new generations, right? That sort of sense of a kind of fundamental sense of survival. In the Freirean sense, the pedagogical project is world making. And Freire arises out of the deep tradition of phenomenology in philosophy, which is this notion, and I think it connects very deeply with aesthetics, which is this notion that what's at stake in the work that we do is really to radically or revolutionarily transform the conditions of consciousness. So that's a demarcation I would make, which is what kinds of collectivities are in a certain sense involved in the process of this radical world making, beginning with the production of new social relations through direct experience or encounter. So in the work of anti-white supremacy, to what extent do we create the conditions for the experience of whiteness itself to be a historical condition? Not only the fancy language, an ontological condition, but actually also a historical condition with its history. So we can begin to tell ourselves the story of our identities. And this is another place where I would say collectivity is essential. That to be in that dialectical relationship of identity with folks of color, with people who are white, are able to be in dialogue together in order to be able to build this historical consciousness, in order to dismantle power. This would be a framing. Then on the other side of that would be the kind of instrumentalized collectivity that and I think many of us are probably seeing arising in this current generation of students, which is the entrepreneurialism, which is collectivity as a way of being able to maximize productivity in order to be able to be competitive within the culture marketplace. It becomes a kind of closing of resources, and it becomes a particular kind of productive niche. And so you're seeing, actually just this morning, and I'll finish with this comment, I have a person that is in a class that I'm doing at the moment who wants to establish a kind of international art collective. And he is very much invested. I mean, a part of it arises out of a terrible urgency, a deep anxiety about how am I going to live beyond graduation. And part of it is, can I create a network that will sustain me, but at the same time is going to be exclusive, so that there will be value, I can produce value. And so I was trying to sort of just search some creative and art collectives, just Googling it today, and it's extraordinary. In Brooklyn, the number of groups that identify themselves as collectives, and then you begin to see what the terms of their investments are, and they're all defined, not around these ontological questions, but purely around the marketplace, the creative marketplace and creative capital. So there's a demarcation that I would make, that I is inspired by bringing Frary into this conversation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We have just a few minutes left, and of course we know that all transformational conversations are intended to provoke more discussions. So I think we all look forward to discussing all of these questions further with anyone who wants it when we end, but also with each other. I actually want to pose some of the questions that we had collectively produced and to the room, but then also to the roundtable, to see if anyone wants to jump in on some of the questions that we haven't really touched on, but also to share the kind of knowledge production that happened, again, in preparation for this. So some of the questions were, how do we see legacies of collective practice being exploited? What are the legacies of collectivity that we inherit, and how is our work in tension with those? How do we continue or work in opposition to those legacies? How do we teach collectivity? What are the pedagogies of collectivity? How are diverse communities and people part of our practices and thoughts? Who gets to be a member of a collective? The questions of place writ large in terms of geopolitics, transnational work, as well as localities, traversing worlds, art, and otherwise could all be considered here. What is the location of our collective practice? How do our practices cross borders? And so with that, I want to ask for everyone to maybe put in some closing thoughts, if you're motivated. Salome?
Oh my God, my brain is everywhere. Take that one, yeah. when we first began talking about collective, we talked about the incubator as the new form of collective practice in the marketplace that, you know, just threatens to eat artists alive. And to me, it's like the body that the spirit has vacated. It's kind of the other end of the continuum that I was born into, of these utopian collectives of early feminism and the art practice I'd inherited from my grandparents. And now the dystopia that kind of challenges our value systems. And I was also thinking about, when we were talking a little while ago about the historical situation of pedagogy. And I think the classroom is like a performance where it's a thing in and of itself. It's the God on stage, and yet it's always referring to something out there. Like the documentary film is the thing in and of itself, but it refers to something that really happened somewhere else, in another time and place. And that's what happens in a classroom, and any kind of pedagogical or artistic collective practice is we're achieving a process that's happening in this space here and now, and yet it's always referring to something that happened outside that space, many things that happen outside that space, and it continues to refer to things that will yet happen in the future. But, you know, I guess that's it.
Anyone else? We just have a couple minutes.
Hey, I just wanted to say happy Valentine's Day to everybody and spread the love, because we all need it. We really do. Thank you.
So I think that's a wrap.
Thank you all so much for coming. I think we had a great and exciting day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to my awesome Roundtable participants. And thank you to all of you.